Hi folks, it's me Michaela and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing all of the books I read in the month of April. April is not quite over yet, but I'm definitely not going to be reading. Well, I'm going to be reading. I'm just not going to be finishing any more books this month because the book I'm reading right now is quite the brick. I'm in the middle of doing a reading vlog that will hopefully be posted next week. And you'll see what that book is there, but it's definitely not being finished in the next couple of days. So this is going to include all the books that I have read and finished in the month of April. Let's talk about my stats, right? As we always do, okay? In April, I read a total of 5 books. They were all books that I owned physically and I read that were brand new to me. Didn't have any rereads this month. I had a really good average rating of 4 stars. Definitely like some middle of the road books, but there's also some really high points for the month. I read a total of 1,961 pages for an average book length of 392, and I averaged about 65 pages a day. Now, the 65 pages a day feels a little low for my normal, but again, that's because there's still a couple days left in April that I am reading that I'm not including because I didn't finish the books. And then also at the beginning of the month, I went on vacation. So the first book I read this month, I read half of it on a plane ride there, then didn't read like for the entire week I was on vacation, and then read the other half of that book on the plane ride back. So there's like 6-ish days in there where I just like didn't read at all. That kind of has brought the average down, but overall I'm still quite happy, especially at the end of the month. I've been feeling very like excited about the reads I'm having, and I've been reading a lot more than I think I have in March. March was a pretty slow reading month, but I really feel like I'm back at it. I also have most definitely 100% entered my romance era because every single book I read this month was a romance, which is like shocking still to me because I feel like even like 6 months ago I was barely reading romance, and now it's like 90% of what I'm reading is romance, and like what a change of pace that has been. I think I am going to try and slow down the romance reading right now just because I don't want to like burn myself out on it. I am really enjoying it. I am really having a fun time, and there is still a lot more romance that I want to be reading, but I also don't want to read so much that then I put myself into a reading slump. So I'm going to try and read some other genres in May to balance out the romance reading, or at least that's the plan. To talk about the books that I read, let's get into it, shall we? The first book that I read this month was The Deal by Elle Kennedy. This is her first book in the Off-Campus series, and I gave this a 3.5. It was a good book, it was a fine book, but it wasn't a great book for me. The main female character in this, Hannah, is a music major. This is a like college hockey romance. And look, I was a music major in university. I have 4 degrees, certificate, diplomas, like I've spent a long time, 8 years to be exact, doing music, voice, and opera degrees at university. And so to read this book where it doesn't make sense was a bit frustrating for me. They're saying things like sing the last note E major, which there's just so many things musically incorrect about that. Like, I don't even want to get into it. And then also she's a music major for what appears to be like pop music, which I don't know of existing, but I guess maybe it does. So like just the fact that she's like a pop college major is a little interesting to me personally, but that could just be my own ignorance. But then she also like doesn't appear to have like a voice teacher or take voice lessons, and then she's like never taken voice lessons but has a full ride scholarship at this school because she just sings and it's amazing. And knowing the amount of like work and effort that needs to be put in even by people who are naturally talented in order to be successful. There's a lot to singing other than just being naturally good. So it was just like frustrating to read that personally. I also found like the major thing for me that bumped this down on rating scale, because the music thing, it was like a personal pet peeve, but it was kind of just fun to laugh at, but it wasn't like a deal breaker on a book for me or anything. But like both of these characters have some past trauma and like really like heavy topic backstories to them, and I'm not necessarily against that, but to have that playing against the fact that this book in tone is very like lighthearted, happy, and funny, it felt really juxtaposed in not a good way, to have funny haha rom-com and then you're like slapped in the face with trauma. You know, it just like wasn't working for me for this. But I did really like the overall vibe. I liked the rom-com feeling. I liked the characters enough. And, you know, I liked the writing. I definitely will read more Elle Kennedy. I actually ended up reading the next book in this series later on this month. So I'll talk about that soon. So it wasn't like a bad book by any means. It just like definitely wasn't the best book I've ever read, you know? I then read Unravel Me by Becka Mack, and this is the third book in her Playing for Keeps series, so I'm now actually up to date on this series because the fourth book hasn't released yet. But this book was like a disappointment. I gave this book 3 stars. I had so many thoughts and feelings about this book that I made a like rambly rant review video specifically about this book because I just had so many thoughts and feelings. So I'll link that for you if you want to see that. And I can't really talk about a lot of the things that I found annoying in this book without spoilers. My other video is full of the spoilers, so if you really want to know details, like go there. But mainly, I had expectations for this book that I was going to like it, and then I think because it was disappointing, it was even more disappointing because of the expectations I had. And mainly it's that this book wanted to be a slow burn romance, but this book is not at all. It is like the opposite of a slow burn. Basically, like, the characters are acting like they're taking things slow and they're in a really slow kind of romance, but like their actions then aren't that, and that was really annoying for me because I love a slow burn romance. And so for this book to be like, this is a slow burn romance, but then like the reality is that it's not, was something I disliked. It also was just too cheesy for me. Like, in romance books, I expect there to be cheese. You want the cheese. Like, that's part of the reason why you're there, right? But like, this book was just like way too much. Like, it just constantly was. And the way people have conversations in this book just didn't really feel realistic. It also really bothered me that like, if you're someone in this book that is supposed to be like someone you're not rooting for, instead of just them being unlikable, like that person is like the worst person to ever exist on the planet. And it's just like a little too extreme for me. Yeah, this book was a 3 stars. It probably needed to be edited a bit more. I think if it wasn't so long even, I would have been less disappointed by all the other aspects that bothered me a bit in it. It was just a little too much. So like, April was off to just kind of being like a meh reading month, you know? But then I read Heartless by Elsie Silver, and I gave this 5 stars. I read this book in less than 48 hours. I absolutely devoured it, could not put it down. Okay, I am about to have a mentee bee over this video because I'm now filming it for a 3rd time. The dedication. So I believe I was just telling you about how I absolutely devoured Heartless. We're fine. We're talking about books. We love talking about books. I basically have read 2 Elsie Silver books, and now I'm like, Elsie Silver is one of my favorite authors. I'm an Elsie Silver girly, cowboy romance, yeehaw. Because this book was even better than the first book. It was so good. This was a slow burn that was actually a slow burn romance for me, which was mwah. It was great. Okay, loved it. Single dad romance. I haven't read a single dad romance before. This is like a favorite among the romance girlies kind of trope, I think. But I just like really love these characters. I love this setting, and it's just like, it's a fun little time. I like reading books that are like in settings that are completely the opposite of my life. It makes things fun. You know, that's why we read fiction partly, right? Is to experience things we haven't before through books. Super enjoyed this. Like the characters, like how it made sense for the romance to be slow burn because of each of their backgrounds and like how that works. The conflict, although it being something that I feel people could feel very strongly about either way, I think in this situation worked as the conflict, and I think it was resolved well, which is why I gave it 5 stars. Perfect, wonderful, amazing. I need to get my hands on the next book like yesterday, you know, like I need to read more Yeehaw Cowboy Romance Elsie Silver books. And the great thing for me is that there's now like so many. Like there's so many for me to catch up on. And that is great news because I've been loving them. So then after Heartless, I did read the next book in the off-campus series, like I mentioned earlier, which was The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. And I gave this book 4 stars. It was better than the first book. It didn't have the same kind of like jarring, dark trauma backstories paired with really super lighthearted storylines. So that felt better in this. I did feel that it was almost too short. It kind of felt like it just like ended. Especially the third act conflict was kind of just like conflict, resolution, done. And then it was like epilogue skipped to years later, happy. And I was like, whoa. You know, it was kind of like a lot. But I didn't like hate that. It just like kind of felt a little sudden at the end. And the thing is that it's not even like it's a long book. It's barely over 300 pages. But it kind of felt like we got near the end and it was like, oh man, it's the end. We got to wrap things up, baby. We need to wrap things. And I'm like, why are we wrapping things up so quickly? I feel like this didn't need to be this condensed. And then also just in general, this again is a series that is college sports, specifically hockey romance. And I just found this one specifically was a little too young for me to feel relatable. Like I couldn't connect to it the same way because especially Grace, the female main character in this, during like her first 2 years at university, so she's like really young, 19, just becoming an adult, finding yourself kind of side to a story. And as a 27-year-old woman, that's just not something I necessarily like connect to and am super interested in reading. And that's not the book's fault at all. It's just like wasn't something that I loved. So it was like a good book and I liked it and I had a fun time, but I wasn't like, oh my god, this was amazing, I loved it, just because that felt a little unrelatable to me because I am now old. But after this, my final book I read this month was Every Summer After by Carley Fortune, and I really truly adored this book. It wasn't quite a 5-star. I gave it 4.5, but the writing in this was so good. Like I was feeling all of the emotions, like the emotions, all of them happening to me. This is like a second chance romance and it is dual timelines. So present day, you know that something happened 12 years ago that broke Sam and Percy, and now she gets this call. Basically, Sam's mother has died, and she goes back to the lake town for her funeral, and they like reconnect there, right? And so while you're reading the present day, which like the present day storyline is like maybe 3 days of life, but it doesn't feel like it. And then in between, you're like flashing back from the time when she was like 13 and every summer go up to this cottage that her parents bought where she then spend the whole summer with Sam and like the relationship that's building there. And there's this like nostalgia and sadness, especially in the like flashback chapters, because you know something happens that breaks it. So like there's this certain kind of like melancholy to it all that was just like so good. It also is like, it felt a bit more literary, and I think it was partially because the writing style felt a little more elevated than some of the other romances that I've been reading, and that doesn't make these ones bad. It just makes these ones like really easy, digestible, fun reads, and this is still like easily digestible, but it's just like a bit more, I don't know, the writing just felt different to me. But yeah, it just felt a tad more literary. And then it also isn't dual POV. You only get Percy's POV in this and not Sam's, and I think that actually works really well for this story. The only things I didn't like about this story is that once the big reveal is revealed, I really am still on the fence about how I really feel about that personally. Like I just like, I'm kind of like I didn't love that that's how things happened, but like I've accepted it but it just didn't, it made it so it's not a 5-star. Along with the fact that at the beginning of this, in like present day, Sam has a girlfriend, and that I didn't super love. I understood the literary reason, the justification, like plot wise, I knew why that character was there. However, I didn't feel like it was like strong enough that she like absolutely needed to be there, and I think I would have liked the book better if Sam just didn't have a girlfriend at the beginning of this book in present day. That's just like my thoughts and feels. So like a 4.5. Great end to the month, and I will be reading more Carley Fortune because it felt like a super great summer read. Really quick, really easy. You're getting like the summer lake beach vibes. It was perfect. Especially I read it like when it was like finally warm enough, so I like read a lot of it out on my balcony, and it just was like a really good feeling, you know, other than of course like the melancholy and sadness and nostalgia, but like that also was like good because like sometimes like you need to feel a sad emotion, right? Anyway, that was my reading for the month. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope this is still recording. You better be, or else I will just delete my whole channel. If you've read any of these authors or any of these books, let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know your favorite read from April. If you happen to like this video, make sure to give it a like, give it a little thumbs up. And if you happen to like me, consider subscribing. I'd be happy to have you. And with that, I hope you're having a wonderful day today. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.